good, everybody? This is Scoobert Dubert with Love Music More. I am joined with producer, mix engineer, musician extraordinaire, Harper James. Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
We're going to have a great conversation about all of the above, making music, mixing music, the modern world. We were just talking about kind of how the mix note process has evolved with all these new tools and stuff. But before we hop into all of that, my favorite thing to talk about is just kind of how you came up. How did you kind of fall in love with music? How did you get into this bizarre career that
totally
pursue?
I feel like it's one of the things where I wind up sort of talking about this, my sort of like introduction to all this stuff a lot. And it's like every time I try and like hone it down to like a less ambling version.
Yes.
So this like doesn't take 40 minutes. So I initially was like a total like jazz head in high school. And I was one of those people. I would go in my basement and practice like 8 hours a day. And
guitar?
It was
guitar?
Just,
what was your, where did you start?
Guitar.
Yeah.
And I was in some sort of like, bands in like middle school, but sort of like end of middle school, high school, I got really into it. And I ended up studying jazz and really sort of being disillusioned with it in just sort of like not the music, but in just sort of like the way that it seemed like it was playing out with the people who were teaching me, who were my idols. The cool thing about jazz is like you can have your favorite living jazz player, you can go to their show and they'll give you a lesson for like $60,
Yeah.
And so I had access to these people who I idolized, and I ended up feeling like, a lot of it, especially now, and I think every generation it gets harder. So even some of the guys who had cool careers and were touring and on Blue Note or whatever, like they were the last of a certain kind of generation, like Joshua Redman and, this guy, Peter Bernstein, I really liked. And it seemed like the more years that passed, the more it really just disappeared as like a career, and it became more of a teaching thing. And I think teaching is great, but I sort of felt a little bit alienated by like, it's just this sort of like self-fulfilling cycle of like you learn it and then you teach it, and it didn't really seem like there was a lot of options for a career outside of maybe just gigging around at restaurants, and maybe if you get lucky getting on like Crisscross and they'll send you to Europe for a week and you make like $1,000 or whatever at the best, at the top, and there are those exceptions, like
of course,
but generally I just sort of felt like, maybe this isn't really a life that I want, even though I love the music. And so I had a period of time where I was a little bit just like lost and playing in bands and being the kind of like de facto Logic, engineer for bands because no one else wanted to do it.
Exactly.
And then having some good experiences and bad experiences in studios that led me to sort of have that like sort of guided thought of like, hey, maybe I could do this better, And of course, when you have that thought, you can't, but it can lead you down a path where eventually maybe you can.
That's good.
And so I sort of had that thought, and it got me into some trouble, but it ended up like where I kind of ended up like recording and mixing some like indie pop, indie rock, EPs. And one of those situations got me in a place where actually this guy Michael Brower was mixing it. It's something that I had like produced, right? Like I didn't know what I was doing. I just had recorded a few things, and it was the band, and the band sort of was like, nothing, but they had a manager who knew a lawyer who was Michael Brower's lawyer, and I guess our EP got to him, and
cool.
He was like, "This is cool," and it was like we couldn't really afford his rates, but he was like, "If you come in like next weekend."
Nice.
I'll just do it. And it was cheap, and I mean, relatively cheap. I can't remember exactly how much, but between everybody, it was fine. And I was like, you have those moments when you're like, what is this? This is cool, And I think I walked into Electric Lady, and I knew enough to know like this guy, Michael Brower, had done some Coldplay records that I liked. He'd done a John Mayer record, and back in the day, he'd done some like cool soul stuff, like a Luther Vandross thing that I'd heard that was cool. And it was like very much one of those like transformative experiences where like I'd never been in front of like a large format console. I'd never really talked to someone who was like in the middle of it, and he's a character and like, still an inspiration. And it turned out to just be this fortuitous thing where even to this day, I'm still very interested in like his workflow. And anyway, he had an assistant, Ryan Gilligan, who's a good friend of mine, who I kind of became friends with over the weekend and then stayed in touch with a little bit. And I had reached out to him at some point and I was like, hey man, like I'm kind of just like working at a restaurant, doing some live sound gigs, kind of hating life, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
But I really liked, and I'm kind of like over the band thing and I don't know what to do, but I really had a great time mixing this record.
Yes.
And he was like, you should like apply to this program Mix with the Masters, which didn't have a website at the time. Some people have heard of this. For people who haven't, it's essentially like an educational website where they talk to the great engineers of our day and get them to give you sort of tips and tricks and inside scoops or whatever. But at the time, it was actually Michael Brower's, I think, idea to get a bunch of people together to just teach. And it was I think the first or the second ever year. So it was just this like summer camp for like grown-ups, basically.
Was Victor involved? I think
Victor, yeah. Victor, yeah. And in fact, Victor's funny. But like, so and at the time it was very much like invite only kind of thing. It wasn't clear that I would be able to go because I wasn't really a professional. A lot of the guys who end up going, they had Grammys and they had mixed #1 records, like the students, right? And I was just like some kid who like thought mixing was cool, but because I had worked a little bit with Brower, I sort of got like just sort of ushered in as like a kind of a guinea pig, like you're the one who's in the band, like we can kind of like make fun of you and whatever. You had that experience of actually having your record mix, which never got released or whatever, but still like I could stand in for the artist basically.
Yes.
But so I went and like it was one of those rare, like again, sort of like reorienting experiences in life where I remember my main thought was like, so I have half of the shit I don't really understand, but I'm very interested in it. And I felt like I had found my people. Like there was a kind of combination of like creativity and like nerdiness that I felt really comfortable with, that I did not sort of feel so aligned with a lot of the sort of like musicians and bands and artist vibes that you hang out with in the green room or whatever. Like because I think one of the things a lot of producers and engineers have in common is they don't actually want to be the center of attention.
Yeah. Yes. And
I found that to be nice. Like I don't want to be the center of attention either. Exactly. I mean, I am in a band now with my brother, but like sort of conveniently, I'm the, as they say in, what's that movie?
Like 10 feet from
almost famous.
Almost famous.
And they get in this argument where the guitar player, they print the t-shirt or the record cover and the guitar player's out front and the singer's like, oh, I'm just like the out of focus guy. That's great. And he's like really pissed because like he's not in, but I'm like, I want to be the out of focus guy, you know?
Totally.
And I feel like the producers are totally, you're in the band, but you're the out of focus guy, and I felt like way more comfortable in that relationship to music and the kind of, I realized that my like jazz stuff, interest in like really deep harmony and functional harmony, all the kind of nerdy technical stuff, there was a huge aspect of that in mixing. And so my brain, I was able to sort of make that changeover actually. Like that was when I kind of fully had found the next thing, And so anyway, I'm sorry, I'll fast forward. I ended up basically having that experience, but then I came back home and it was sort of a letdown because like, great, now what, And I had made some friends who were in New York and some of them were like super cool and great engineers. And one of them had worked on like, a bunch of like, I think Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And one of them had a bunch of Latin, stuff he'd done. It was really cool. But even so, it's just like, I didn't really know what to do with myself. I kind of had a network of support, but nowhere to be an engineer. So my partner, who's still my, partner, basically was like, dude, you're depressed. You need to like do something. Why don't you get a job at a studio? And I was like, well, that's not how it works anymore. There are no jobs, whatever. So she sent me, and at some point she maybe passive aggressively, or maybe it was an earnest thing, sent me like a link to a studio opening announcement in Sonic Scoop, which was Justin Coletti is a pretty big sort of like YouTube tutorial, like guru type online person now, but he had a cool blog and he's a mastering engineer called Sonic Scoop, and it had listed DeGraw Sound as a new studio opening. And I realized that I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who like knew Ben, the owner. And I was like, that's my in,
Yes.
So at the time I didn't want a job. I emailed him and genuinely was like, I had this experience with Brower and it really inspired me. And then I've been sort of like practicing on my own. I'm a musician. I've been in bands. I'm a jazz player, but like I'm new to the studio world. my main question is like, I'd love to meet with you and just ask you, should I pursue this? Like, what do you think as someone who's like been doing it? And he sort of told me later that he was getting lots and lots of like emails from, every day from colleges for like to place assistants, and would just delete them. But with mine, somehow he thought he knew me. Like the informality of like how I reached out, and the fact that I wasn't asking for a job. I just wanted to say, hey. At first he was like, yeah, I opened it because I thought you were a friend of mine from like this back in the day when I had a studio at my house or whatever. Cool. And then he realized, oh no, he's just like a random person. But it was too late. He said, sure, come on by. And, I came by the studio, and I flatter myself maybe, but I think we ended up having like a great, like 3-hour conversation about life and music and everything. Mm-hmm. And he sort of was like, okay, fine. Come back Monday and like, let's see. I don't really want to get an assistant. I don't really want to whatever, but you seem cool. We had a good chat. Come on back. And like, I have been here every single day for like 10 years.
Awesome.
And over that time, I ended up evolving into less of like an engineer and whatever, and more of like my own production career, where I'm not like engineering on. I started assisting, and then I was engineering bands and stuff, and now I sort of have my own space and do that. But we're still every day hanging, and it's great to have that friendship and like collegiality in a profession that can be kind of isolating, honestly, sometimes. Just you and your computer screen, and artists and clients, but having that kind of colleague on call in the next room has been a good thing, and part of the reason I stayed here for so long.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I did not cut it down. It was good. That was probably a longer version.
I love there's like a million things I don't want to dig deeper into in there too. So don't feel bad. You actually gave me a really good table of contents for the rest of this podcast.
Yeah, I figured just set the scene so
exactly.
It sort of makes sense, and then we can just talk about whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk about that kind of mix with the masters. Did you feel like you were kind of like networking with people? Are you still in contact with some of these people? Just curious kind of how that evolved.
I'm like, someone who's super skeptical of all of the like educational content online. I think a lot of it does more harm than good. And ironically, I think some of the technical stuff that I was gleaning from Mix with the Masters, like, might have been too much too soon and set me off on these tangents of trying to like browerize stuff and whatever.
Right.
And so, whatever I learned technically and whatever relationships and networking I did there, was less important than being inspired. And one of the things about that sort of situation in particular is it's now it's sort of an institution, and it just had that feeling, when something is, but like, before it becomes a thing, but like before, there's a kind of energy. And like I said, I don't know how it is now, but like literally in my class, it was like the guy who had produced this record for Train that actually Brower had been, I think, maybe like almost mixed, but then they went with like Chris Lord Algae or something instead. Right, and so he mixed like some Train, he did like mixed it himself and was like, well, this is what I would have done. And another guy was like really had like multiple like Latin Grammys. Another one had worked on a bunch of, massive records. I was like so out of my depth, and it was great. It was like one of those rare, just, it was like kismet or whatever. I just was at the right time and the right place and the right series of events to just kind of like allow me to have the privilege of this kind of like really eye-opening opportunity and meet these really cool people. But I have to say, it's funny, when I came back to New York, it really felt like I was kind of back at square one. And it was through another sort of series of just like funny little circuitous turns that I wound up here. And I'm still friendly with all those guys. And Ryan is a great mixing engineer out in LA who's very much like in my generation and community. And I'm still friends with him. And he's people like that who like are around your age but have been doing it longer are a great resource in the beginning. And so I've definitely like called on people, but more is just like help with questions about career and engineering and managers and all this kind of stuff that you run into.
Yes, it's funny that you should say that. So one of the people that I talked to before I kind of went this direction with my music and mixing and all this kind of stuff was John Stork, who designed Electric Lady Studios. Oh yeah, forever ago. And I was talking to him about like how this kind of stuff. It wasn't a podcast. I wish it was, but he was talking about that kismet, that serendipity, that like literally the best thing you can do is go where you're led and go there. Absolutely. Yeah. And how that's, I keep hearing that from person after person after person. It's not really luck. It's something else. It's like this kind of channeling that if
I
you
think it's
follow
like
it, you're rewarded.
it's a deep clarity of purpose. Like I think even it's like, and I think that's when I say like that experience of like getting to work with Michael Brower before I really had any, reasonable reason to be doing so. And then doing this little sort of, training program. It was more like it clarified in me what I wanted on a deep level. I don't know how to get it. So I kind of felt like at sea there, but I think it was like every day became a search for how am I going to like express this desire to like become more a producer or engineer on the other side of the glass thing. And it was just like any little opportunity, like, to sort of like check out was of interest to me. But it did take my lovely partner sort of goading me to actually make a move. Yes. But I think that aside, it was eventually I was going to have to do something because I knew. And I think that was like, that's often I think at the heart of why things kind of work out. It's just because you know what direction you want to go in. You might not know how, but I think a lot of my life, I'm very unclear about what I really want specifically in this context or that context. But in that time of my life, I think it was clear. I needed to sort of like make a change. And I had identified the direction. I just didn't know what to do about it. And so when the opportunity presented, when Ben asked me to come back on Monday, I heard in my head, I'm here for the rest of my life. Like, it was just like, you just like, I don't even know that he really meant that, but I took it because I was like, sure, whatever. You need me to clean the bathroom, whatever. You need me to, and I've noticed talking with young people who maybe want to be in it and do some work with me or an assist or whatever, which happens, that there's people where it's like, they're very unclear as to whether they really want to do this or, and that's totally fine. Yeah. But it's a different approach where they're like, well, does this make sense with my schedule? And then there's the people who are just like, okay, I will, I'll just quit my job and move to this thing. They're like so gung ho. Even if I'm like, okay, I don't quite have that spot, I have no doubt that they're going to find something because there's just that like, there's that clarity, of what they want. I want to be in a studio. I wanted to be in a studio every day. You know what I mean? I think I realized that. And I was like, I need to be in a studio every day, my studio, someone else's studio, as a band, as a producer. But that's the place that I feel like I want to be,
I feel that very deeply. And and having that kind of North Star that helps make those hard decisions easier. Like
and I think it was
No, you go for it.
And it wasn't like I want to be a famous engineer, producer, hero. I don't. It was like I just want to be in a studio every day. Exactly. It was, and it still is very. It's like a very like mundane ambition. And I definitely have other ambitions too. But really, at the core of it, the thing that I've never wavered on is just like I need to figure out a situation where I can just be in the studio every day. Yep. And like everything else will kind of sort itself out.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, I resonate deeply with that. Where it's like my North Star is I have a lot of musical ideas and I need to express them, and it's through studio. It's like it's not really like live is fun, but that's fun. It's like what I need to be doing is like making these ideas real so that people can have them.
Exactly. It's funny. I think for me, it's like even more amorphous because I'm not, I am in a band and I have a side project, but I'm just sort of like, I want to be in a studio.
I love it.
And it could be my idea or their idea.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably what makes me more of like a producer and less of, an artist or whatever in terms of just like the way things skew. Even in my own artist projects, I'm just like, I just sort of like playing around in the studio. And I think like, it's like, I feel of it almost like as, and one of the things that's, for me is like building my own little room.
Yes.
I mean, it's a very small space, but I've spent a lot of time just like really getting it to be the sort of like creative, like embodiment or reflection of like the inside of my own mind. And I feel like, I love this little space and it's like exactly how I want it. And it's sort of weird and an eclectic assortment of stuff, but it just, I feel like really happy here, most of the time. When it's not 3 a.m. and I'm like doing like mix 8 or something.
Exactly. There's always downs. But I hear you. I mean, my space is not ideal. I'm in my bedroom. But I've, produced and mixed several things that have gone in movie theaters and major labels on TV, all this kind of stuff in my little bedroom. But it's because I had kind of like figured out I need this much. Everything else would be really nice, but like I've got
Yes, no space is ideal. Like my space isn't ideal at all, but it's like my space. And I think it's like every inch of it is like exactly the thing that emerged out of my particular version of crazy or whatever. And I think like, you know, that was important to me. Like in some ways, one of the, I don't know, I could go on, but yeah. So I think it was like just this wanting to be in a studio. So when when I was an assistant, it was in the tracking room every day. I just wanted to be there, making coffee, setting up mics, whatever. And it evolved, you know, but like, yeah, it's always sort of been that, you know, being in that creative physical space. I just love,
I resonate with that. I'm curious. I want to dig into what you were talking about, like YouTube tutorials, because I think a lot of people think like, oh, I could do this all on my own, or I don't need collaboration. I don't need the physical space. I'm just going to grind YouTube tutorials. And like, I see a lot of people that do reproductions, like they break down a mix or an arrangement and they build it back up themselves. I see value in a lot of that kind of stuff, but I'm curious where your take is, and your take on like learning in general, especially in such a nebulous thing like production.
100%. Well, the classic thing right around when I was looking was that the model was switching over from like an apprenticeship model to a more like you're on your own kid model.
Right.
And it was like, you have to prove to the world that you're capable of making something cool in your bedroom, and then someone might take notice and kind of mentor you, but it still won't be this official one-on-one year-long to year-long relationship.
Yeah.
And I kind of had a few moments where I thought maybe if I like reached out, I could probably have a chance at getting situations like that. And I sort of decided not to. I think it was ego. I think I was like, I just want to make my own shit now. I don't want to wait 2 years and be someone's like whatever. And I was young, so it was just like, I don't know, who knows? I don't have any regrets, but I think at this point it's like that ship has sailed. And so it really leaves the question of how do you learn stuff? And I don't think the answer is probably going to school for it. Not that you shouldn't, because I think there can be relationships that you build. But it, you know, reminds me a lot of like jazz school, where it was like the kids who were good when they graduated were good when they got there, or they just hold themselves up in their room and just practice like more than anyone else. That was the only thing. There was no one who was like, oh, if you take this class, like you're gonna. It was very much, you know, this kind of like you yourself and yourself figuring it out. I think, and then you had teachers, but I think I think my like philosophy around it is learning is really personal and like intimate. Like everyone learns how to do stuff in a different way. And, you know, my metaphor is it's like learning from someone else can be like someone giving you directions when they don't know where you're at. So they're like, oh, it's easy. The girl story is like, go out, you know, take a left, another left, and go straight. You're like, but you don't know where I am. So if I follow your directions, I'm going to wind up in the fucking, you know, in a lake or whatever. And so the issue with like a YouTube tutorial is the person, there's, you know, a lot of issues, but one that I think you can't really get around is that the person saying it doesn't know you and doesn't know where you're at. So they don't know how to give you directions to where you want to go, because they don't even not know where you're at. They actually don't know where you want to go. So like, I think that it's an art finding resources that you know will work for you. And in a weird way, the skill that you have to develop is identifying the people and the resources that just kind of you have an intuition that I can trust this person because they're kind of speaking from a place that's a little bit like where I'm at, or speaking to people who are like me. But that's like not something that is, you know, out there as information. Like you just have to like deduce that from context and from experience. But I also think the idea that this kind of thing can be taught is to some degree like wishful thinking. Because man, wouldn't it be great if someone could just kind of tell you how to mix? Because it's so hard, you know. I think partly it's out of like a desire to just bypass the torturous self-doubt and failings and stuff that are just always part of it, like mentor or not. And like I think partly it can just be a distraction from sitting with what's in front of you and trying to really see what's there, and like using your ears and your imagination and the tools you have at your disposal to make the next best choice, which is essentially what everything ends up being. And like, there is no like promised land of figuring it out as far as I can tell. There's just getting better and better at like flying by the seat of your pants, where you're just, I feel like for me, the thing that's really changed, other than my monitoring getting better, which was helpful,
That's
the thing
helpful.
that's changed that I've learned is to be better at zooming in and zooming out on problems.
Agreed.
So like,
Yep.
when I'm working with like an artist who's maybe like mixed their own song and it's like, help me, it's a mess,
Yeah.
and they'll bring it in. Like 90% of the time, I'll just be like, all right, well, your kick drum's like 12 dB too loud. And they're like, oh my God, you fixed it,
Right,
and it's because I just zoomed out for 1 second because they're in there doing all this stuff and I'm just like, zoom out, all right, your kick drum's too loud, and then, you just learn by sort of like unconscious, like accumulation of experience, like how to be better.
Yes.
But I think that like the idea that someone can speak to you that information and then you can kind of like now know, at best, it just confirms what you already know. So the best teaching experiences have been when I sort of suspected something and someone I really respect and trust has basically said something that makes me feel like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm on the right path.
Yes.
As I was, continue, like that. It can just be reassuring to hear someone else is thinking about it in a similar way. But man, I feel like my whole life I've been really into learning how to do stuff. Like first it was guitar and then it was engineering. And when I was a kid, I wanted to speak French. So I've really like, I don't know why. It's like a person I like work. But the thing I've learned about learning is it's like, it's a lonely experience when it's done right. I think to some degree, it's a very like, or it's a, not, it doesn't have to be lonely, but it's a singular, it's an introspective thing. It's not a looking for the right tip thing. And yeah, I think a lot of the tips, educational stuff comes out of a economic engine that needs content. And it's very easy. I know I have like a TikTok account where I try not to give tips, but I just talk about music and how I think about stuff.
Yeah.
But even then I sometimes catch myself being like, wow, I can kind of like wind up a good story about almost anything. It doesn't necessarily mean it's helpful. Do you know what I mean? So I got to kind of like watch that sort of tendency to just kind of talk about stuff because it's fun and interesting, but is it helping someone? I don't know. So I have to like, I definitely think about that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're hitting on like the deductive versus inductive kind of, is it logical or is it actually illogical, these steps? Where you have to almost learn by osmosis. You have to learn by doing. It's not, there's like a funny phrase that I've used before. It cannot be taught. It can only be learned. It's like a Zen koan. Like you have to do it. You have to learn it yourself. It hasn't. And like you're saying, you can be led in certain directions and that can help. And there is like a logical underpinning that you have to kind of understand, like how to use the tools, the keyboard shortcuts, like how to troubleshoot. Like there are linear logical things that are built in, but that's not the thing itself. Those are like the nuts and bolts.
When I it's really funny. And I think the truth is those things that can be taught are very easy to learn.
I agree.
I mean, everything's relative, but like actually at first you got to like understand compression and learn how to use a compressor and you got to learn how to use your DAW, like your software. But that actually doesn't take very long. Like almost anyone can spend like a month and kind of learn how to do that stuff. And then at that point, it's like, it's almost like the on-ramp just ends. Yeah. And you're just in a field and you just got to start walking in a direction. Like, and I don't know that there's a way around it. And I'm almost glad that there's not, because it means that everyone who arrives, I think when I was starting, I had this idea that all of the greats at any given field had like arrived in the same room and they were all in this room over there and talking to each other. And I'm over here in my room and I just need to know how to get into that room so I can like do what they do. Turns out they're all just totally spread across the globe in different places. Yeah. And a lot of the times, like, my take is like, okay, if you're talking about mixing engineers, like someone like Chad Blake or Manny Miracoin or Michael Brower cannot do and does not understand what the other people are doing. They're doing their own thing. And if you were to try and ask them to like do this other thing, it would be like asking someone, who played guitar to play the same thing on a tuba. Most of them would just be like, I don't do that. That's not what I do. I do something else. Yeah. So we all have to just come to our own arrival. And there's no one who's going to tell us that we've arrived anywhere. Like, so it is kind of got this like Zen paradox
Yeah.
quality to it, where it's like there is nowhere to arrive, and there's like there's nothing to arrive at, and yet somehow, and there's no direction that's progress, and somehow we all have to just walk in a direction and say that it's progress, and then say we've arrived somewhere, and that's all there is to it.
Yes.
We just have to believe it. And I think so much of like the journey is of creativity or art or anything is just convincing yourself through your experience that indeed you can be trusted. Your impulses are right. And it's that weird experience that sometimes it takes 10 years to look back and be like, man, that work I was doing like way before I knew anything was pretty good. And some of the stuff I was doing when I thought I was learning stuff was really bad.
Absolutely.
The intuition got sucked out of it. And that's that like weird learning graph or whatever, where it's like
the Dunning-Kruger.
You gotta, exactly. Some version of that. Yeah.
Right. And I hear you. Like, so most of my first mixes as Scoobert Doobert were me just being like, I don't have any money. I'm just going to finish it. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm not even necessarily trying to be a mixing engineer. I'm just doing this because it needs to be done. And then at a certain point, do you know Sam? Is that a little bit? He's the guy that connected us to do this podcast.
I don't know him personally.
Okay,
just from that.
Cool. I was wondering. So he actually, I paid to have somebody else mix my stuff, and he's like, it's worse.
Yeah. That always happens.
Back.
Yeah.
And that was the moment of like, okay, I guess I'm gonna become this thing. And then I fell in love with it. Absolutely fell in love with it. But I had to get over the hump of like, I'm not this. Like, I don't deserve
100%
that. And then it's like, no, actually, like I do. I can't.
I've spent like my entire career trying to figure out how to actually improve on people's demos and not make them worse.
Yeah.
I feel like most, like 90% of professionals make the demo worse. And that was my experience as an artist. And like the ability to take something that really is an idea that someone had that works, that has an artistry to it, but for whatever reason doesn't quite.
Yeah.
How do you expand on that in a way that feels connected to the creativity of it and not just turn it into like a professional job of the mix? Like, and I feel like, I think the reason that I work is because that's like been my focus.
Cool.
So I sort of like have managed to like avoid knock on wood, but the like constant like, oh, but the demo, it's like, because I think partly the hard lesson that I've learned is respect the stuff that's cool. Don't mess with it. And don't tell artists, like when people will like, oftentimes like when someone like will call me to like mix something, like I had this happen.
Yeah.
They'll be like, man, I did this myself, blah, blah, blah. Like, can you listen to it and what do you think? I very often will just be like, it sounds really good.
Cool.
And they're like, okay, but do you think it could be better? I'm like, yeah, totally it could be better. Because I don't want to be the one who like is like, oh man, I don't know, your snare sounds weird, blah, blah, because then I'm going to be the guy who told them their shit sucked. And then I get into the actual doing of it, and I realized, oh shit, actually there's kind of a thing here that's kind of cool, but I told him that. So like I'm very cautious about thinking of myself as like a professional.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
I get it.
I have just done the thing way more hours.
Yeah.
That's all. But like as soon as I'm a professional, I start making stuff sound lame. Do you know what I mean? I start doing the things. I start notching 300 out of a kick drum just because.
Right. Because that's what
I saw it in a YouTube tutorial or whatever. Like, and I think it's, and I think I'm at a place finally now where I feel a little bit more like, okay, oftentimes when I'm getting something from someone who's not a professional or whatever, I have a big perspective window down into it. And I can say clearly, okay, these things clearly could be looked at, but the deference always errs in favor of what's there, of like whatever emerged in that moment. And like, again, it's like one of those things. Why are YouTube video tutorials bad? I think they just don't acknowledge that part of it. That part of it's just like the good stuff is always just random and chaotic. And then the skill isn't taking something, identifying what's wrong with it, and then fixing it. It's like just finishing the gesture in the best possible way that you can. That doesn't, there's just like not rules there. And like, it's like such a cliche, but it's like, it's one thing to be like, well, there's no rules, but like obviously there's rules. It's like no. There's like no rules. Like we're totally just like free floating in fucking space. Like
Yes.
this is why references are problematic to me, and comparing your mix to here and there. It's just like what you realize is you have 10 references and they all sound more different to each other than your mix does to the reference.
Good.
So what are you going to do about it?
Exactly.
You know, there's nowhere to go.
I've switched to asking artists to be like, regardless of this tune, what are you listening to right now you're super excited about?
Yes. What do you like?
Yeah.
The funny thing is like I have this experience like way more than I should, where someone will come to me, and oftentimes it's someone who's more in like the mainstream pop world, because there's such like a poppy mill of just like cranking out that kind of song in like the music industry or whatever, that it's like what happens is people are like, I would like to be a musician, and then some manager is just like, here you go, boom, and they just shove them in a room with like somebody who like makes a beat in Ableton and they sing over it or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with Ableton, but and like they've never asked themselves like, do they like that style of music? Is it the genre that they wanted to do when they were a kid? Is it what they thought in their mind that they would be doing? It's like, so I will sometimes be the first person to ask someone who maybe has a career, like, how do you feel about like the music you've made so far? And what music do you like to listen to? And is there any overlap? And if there's not, does that bother you? And most of the time they're like, oh yeah, it totally bothers me. I don't really like the genre I'm in. I just sort of thought that that's like what I had to do. And I'll be like, well, it's not. And they'd be like, I guess it's not. And they'd be like, I mean, so we could just rethink things here and try to do something that you might like. And oftentimes it's like interjection, but can be a little bit scary because it's like,
absolutely,
you know. And so anyway, I don't know, I'm just spiraling, but like I think that there's something to the way that we learn and the way that things have become so accessible in terms of like tips and tricks, and you know, that help, that can kind of put us at a distance from like what we always knew, which is that we have our taste, we have the stuff we like, and then that's the thing that's going to like guide us. And that you just, you're going to learn what an EQ is. You got to learn what a whatever is. And once you start to really get into it, you can start looking at like loudness and like how low end, you know, eats up more headroom, but doesn't give you as much perceived loudness. So now I'm mixing and I'm thinking I do some technical knowledge that I can apply. And do you know what I mean? And like, okay, here's what a multi-band compressor does. Oh, I can sidechain a multi-band compressor, you know? So you can learn things, but they're actually, none of them are hard to learn. The technical gobbledygook that people who aren't engineers won't understand on this podcast, turns out, good news, it doesn't really matter. Like, understanding it isn't necessary to even make a great production. Like, it's just like,
And well, I mean, it's the thing that clicked for me that made mixing start to make sense was when I listened to something from Dave Pensato, and he was like, "Stop using equalization so much. Start using more compression. Start using more saturation. Use some tools that are meant for this, for that." And then once I started doing that, I was like,
I'm like surprised Dave gave such good advice on his show.
Yeah, I know, right? It was
That's
good.
really good advice.
Really good. It's really good advice.
Yeah, he's great.
And then I got to attend a workshop thing with Derek Ali, and it was like same kind of deal. Watching him, I got to go in the studio. We're sitting at the console, watching him do his thing. I'm like, I am soaking up a bunch of knowledge just by being in this room, watching him reach for different tools, identify a problem, reach for a different tool, and it's not necessarily the tool that the textbook or the tips would be like, that's what you use here. He's instead knows what he gets out of it, and he goes, hey, if I mix this in, it's going to achieve the same, you know, addition of presence on this decapitator setting or whatever, instead of reaching for an EQ. Like, you start using things that are out of the box.
Yeah, I mean, one good experience for people to have, I feel like, is meeting someone who like you sort of idolize, and trying to be like, so like when you're using like, you know, like your bass and your kick, do you ever like send the kick to like the bottom end of the multi-band compressor to sidechain that? And they just look at you like, dude, what the fuck are you on, man? Like, just relax. You know, and like I've had that happen to me a few times in different ways, and it really just like, you're like, oh, you don't even know what I'm talking about, and you're the guy with the, you know, the billboard or whatever. So it's like, the, you know, the billboard hits or whatever, and it's like, I think that like that's what people need, more than the YouTube videos telling them how
Yeah.
to do all the shit that no one good actually understands anyway, because they're just having fun playing around, you know.
And understanding, like, they develop their sense of taste. Their sense of taste works, and then they do whatever it takes to get there.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Like,
and being honest with yourself. Like,
good.
Yeah. Like being honest with yourself about what you like. And I think that sounds obvious, but most people aren't.
No,
like,
that's not obvious at all.
you know, most people actually, they know what they like, but when they tell the story of what they like, there's all kinds of, you know, stuff that's in there to protect their ego or to make them tell a story that's more interesting about themselves or whatever it is. Like, we have all these motivations but like, the truth is, like, I really like Third Eye Blind's self-titled record, and I will never get over it, you know. And for a while I was like embarrassed by that, until I realized that Eric Valentine, who did it, is like the greatest living engineer, and he's trained all of the cool guys. Like, him and Tony Berg are responsible partly for Sean Everett, who does all the cool Killers and War on Drugs, and Phoebe Bridgers, and, you know, like, then I was like, oh, that is a great all-time record, you know. And but, you know, just an example, it's like, so I think, like, even the idea of a guilty pleasure obviously is like sort of a harmful idea, but like, because the whole thing is like just understanding our own, like, our own taste, and I think, I don't know, like, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with like giving mixing tips on YouTube, but like, I think that it's not what's needed most of the time, you know.
And I think it speaks to that, like, AI kind of mentality that's out there in the ethos right now. Where, you know, they're so focused on, like, what is the problem set that gets us from A to B, rather than being like, wow, that's not even the point. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and also, like, again, honesty. I honestly don't believe that people like stuff that AI makes, like the full stuff. People will say they like it. I just don't believe that they're telling the truth, because it's not very good yet. I think there's a kind of like, you know, rose tinted glasses, because people want, it's like everyone's a futurist now. They want all this technology to be great when it's not yet. I mean, and then the idea is, you know, every Silicon Valley tech bro, their whole thing is, oh, just you wait, Henry Higgins, just you wait. It's going to be great. And you're just like, why don't you just wait until it is great?
Yeah.
And then you can let us know. And then I'll be interested, because I have nothing I have nothing theoretically against AI. I don't actually, I think it'll probably just be used as a tool by people. But I find it amusing. Like, people are like, man, have you seen this? Like, someone was showing me like DALL-E like a while ago.
For sure.
And he was like, have you seen this? I can't remember. It was like some kind of AI version of a famous artist. I think it was something sort of obnoxiously like modern or whatever. But anyway, so he showed me like the AI version, and then he showed me, like, you know, what it was imitating. And I was like, what? It looks really similar. And I would say they both have a lot in common. The one thing I'm noticing about the AI thing is that it sucks, you know? That's the only difference I can sort of point to, is it sort of sucks, you know? Everything else, though, nailed it.
Yeah.
Vibe, style, color, genre, all that stuff is good. It just sucks. And I don't know why it sucks, but it does. But I would postulate, if you've managed to figure out how to make something look, sound, feel exactly like another thing, but you haven't figured out the suck part, that's like a really bad sign, because I'm not sure what you do at that point.
Totally.
How do you unsuck something when you've nailed all of the superficial characteristics? There's not like an unsuck program. And I think partly there's like a paradox here, which is that we've forgotten that, like, art is for humans. So you can't, it's like the Blade Runner like slogan, where they have made these like robots or whatever, and it's called more human than human is like the slogan, which of course is a silly oxymoron or whatever. But this is, I think, where people's heads are at. It's like, we don't want more human than human. That's not a real thing. And so it's like all of these kind of like futurist fantasies we have about like sort of transcending ourselves end up in the same problem, which is like, we don't want things that transcend humanity. Those are like nightmarishly ghoulish scenarios and uncanny valley problems and all this stuff. And so I don't see like theoretically where this is going, because it's like, we already have, humans are incredible machines. Like, our brains are unsurpassable devices, right? And so it's like we're clearly not making machines that are as sophisticated as like a human mind or a body mind integration.
That goes back
we're
to
doing something else.
That's the inductive deductive thing. We can create something that is more deductively powerful than the human mind. Absolutely.
Yes.
You can do way more calculations, way better math. But can we make something that's even close to as inductively powerful as the human mind?
Yeah.
That's like,
and those deductive things are only useful when a human mind is using them. So if they create output that somehow transcends humanity, they will be of no use to us, and they'll just be trash. So like, there has to be, it's a little bit like my problem with a lot of like cutting edge physics that sort of defaults to like, well, we don't really understand conceptually, fundamentally what like the double slit experiment means, but it doesn't matter because it's predictive and the math works. And I'm just like, so as soon as science gives up trying to explain like reality and trying to be symbolically meaningful, then it's just a thing to build weapons, basically. Because the only thing that we use science for now is basically like building bigger bombs. And like all the science that we have to like feed everyone forever and to like what is like there. We don't need more. So the only reason to do it is to like get a better conceptual window into the nature of reality. And as soon as physicists are out there basically being like, well, don't worry too much about like what the Big Bang actually looked like. Just know that we've done the math, or don't worry too much about like what, quantum entanglement actually conceptually is, but like we've done the math. I'm just like, well, then what's left of value, really? Do you know what I mean? Other than just like these systems that like do shit that we may or may not want or need or like. Anyway, whatever. But I feel like it's very, all of this stuff is related. We want to live on Mars because we don't want to take responsibility for the planet. Right. We want AI to solve all our problems because we want to live in a problemless reality where our comfort is maximized and whatever. We want, we want to believe that, that carbon capture technology is going to allow us to pollute as much as we want indefinitely and solve the problem. They're just fantasies. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're just fantasies. And it's like, I think the YouTube tutorials are like a light fantasy of like, I want to just watch something that's going to tell me what to do. Yeah. And it's just a fantasy. That's not how it works. And the discomfort of learning is unavoidable, I think.
Yeah, and the discomfort, maybe just discomfort is unavoidable. But like something that another guy that's part of this record label Beformer, he talks about, he's kind of futurist, where art meets technology. But I love it because he always pushes back way harder than a lot of artists do. And he's like, if the coolest thing about the art is how it's made, it's not cool. Like, exactly. If you have to tell me that AI made it, and now I'm like, oh, that's neat.
Exactly. This is where I say I don't believe when people say they like it. I say, that AI made it, and you're grading on a curve. You're grading on a curve.
I like that. That's good. That's a good way to put it.
It's just like, yes, we all know that AI has like, struggles with doing stuff that isn't a parody. And so when it sort of succeeds, we like give it a big pat on the back, but it's not real. Like it's like this sequestered little thing where we're all patting ourselves on the back for making these cool technologies, but they're not that useful. Like, to me yet, at least.
Well, some of it's the mentality. Like if they had the mentality of we're making a tool to help you go faster, or to help you like solve the worst parts of what you do in the mixing process, we will help you do that.
And I don't understand like the real technical lines between different types of artificial intelligence, because I'm not even sure that we have like a standard definition of what it means. But I would just say like Ozone or Autotune like are already implementing like smart actions or whatever, where they're like, that's what Autotune was. It was like the first tuning AI. It's basically when you turn it into auto mode, it's sort of saying, all right, the manual pitch correction stuff, which is under the hood, we're just going to do a really quick version of that based off of like, some kind of machine learning. So we already use it. So there's no conceptual problem with it. It's like, that's what I mean. When people talk about AI, they're really talking about this like futurist fantasy that they have that isn't connected to like any of the actual plugins or tools. It's like the thing that people are worried about is really the thing that they want. Oh no, a world where AI like does everything for us. Oh no, it's like, I mean, that wouldn't actually be bad. We could all just like hang out and we can get, universal basic income or whatever. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Just like we're not going to go to Mars. We're not going to solve, global warming by making pollution go away. Like You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
we have to just, if you want to solve climate crisis, you have to burn less fuel, use less plastic. Like you have to do less. You have to be more uncomfortable. And maybe just billionaires have, but someone has to be
Mm-hmm.
less comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think like that's Mars is not a solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it would take more resources to like terraform Mars than it would to just like fix our planet for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, I think like, yeah, anyway. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No,
It's all fun fantasy, but I don't think it's like useful,
uh-huh.
you know?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that these kind of conversations are important, especially for technologists and stuff to listen to, because they need to hear the way that their tools are being used and like are interesting by the actual people that end up creating with them.
Yeah.
And by tuning them out or trying to like automate them out, I think that they're ultimately cutting off the like outcome that they're looking for, like a profitable, cool product that people use.
Exactly. And the truth is all the products, the musical AI stuff that I've come across are like goofy.
Yeah,
like
totally,
the
totally.
the dragon bass line where they automatically do your bass. It's just like some MIDI thing where they like can deduce the key using some kind of like key finder or the root finder, and then just like put the MIDI notes in, and they have some presets. It's just like this is not a sell on AI replacing humans or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't particularly. I've never seen like the AI art stuff. I think is because it's not music. It's like you go on there and you try and have it draw the thing you want it to draw and see how far it gets you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I at one point wanted it to like do a compressor, and like it couldn't. It just couldn't do it, and I was like, okay, so I guess not going to be useful here. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm just a little. I feel like I'm like not impressed. So far.
Yeah, no, and it's
I'm open to being impressed,
right.
But I'm also not impressed by people promising me that I would be impressed, or I will be impressed, or I should be impressed. That also doesn't impress me. I actually have to be impressed. I have to like something, made in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that. In terms of, we were just talking about kind of mixing sessions, and I know that after the pandemic, we get these new tools so that people can pipe in and see what you're doing or comment in real time. You can video share. Could you talk a little bit about kind of like the way that the mixing notes and revision process has evolved over time for you?
Yeah, so I'm funny with mixing. Like I said, I do I'd say like a lot of productions and mixes, and then probably 30%. 25 is just like pure mixing stuff for people.
Cool.
That's happening more and more. I think that happens as you go on in your career like that. So like the way that I do it did emerge out of like remote producing in the pandemic. And it was funny. I just had this idea, and I was like, I want something that will allow me to just send like a stream of what I'm working on to someone. Mm-hmm. And so I just like Googled that, and lo and behold, this happens sometimes, right? There was a thing called Audio Movers Listen To that did that. And it was a kind of like new. This is like 2018, or 19. Yeah. And so it was just catching on in like LA, where everything, they would get to all the tech stuff first. But so what I ended up doing was basically trying to create like a virtual session experience. So it was like FaceTime on a phone. And then I would send a listen to stream from my session of like a live feed of exactly what I was working on to their computer. And so we'd be on a phone like this chatting, and they could see the inside of the studio or whatever. And see what I was doing. And they would be hearing with a small delay, right, what I was doing on the other end. And, so they could just in real time talk to me about what I was playing. This worked best when I'm doing most of the heavy lifting in terms of recording. But it can also work the other way around, where someone can send me a listen to of their session and I can kind of comment on it.
Cool.
The real only downside is like what, Zoom fatigue or whatever. Like I can't do 10-hour sessions like that. So what I ended up doing is identifying like the fact that, okay, mostly in like a production session, I am getting to like what the thing is in the first part of the process. So it's like once you throw those like 4 key ideas down, you're really locked in to like what it's going to be, which can be good because it means that at that point, the artist can say, I really like this direction. This is super cool. do your thing. I'm going to go
Yes.
in and do all my editing and lay down some ideas.
Cool.
And then maybe I send them a bounce and they have some notes and we get back together on another remote thing. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like this on again, off again, like thing where I'm minimizing the amount of like Zoom fatigue and like 6-hour phone calls or whatever,
Right.
but still for those really important, like foundational setup things, you get
Yeah.
them in the virtual room with you.
Cool.
And for mixing that, so for mixing, like I actually am a weird person where I'm like pretty split between, I actually like having people here sometimes and
That's
like while
cool.
I'm mixing, just looking over my
Neat.
shoulder.
Cool.
And I do like it because it doesn't bother me. I don't feel like some people are like anxious or whatever.
Yes,
I
totally.
think it took a little confidence, you know, but like I think that I'm confident enough now that like I'm not embarrassed about my process, which I think I probably was before because it probably involved a lot of guessing and or whatever. But I think as I became like less embarrassed about the process and just more like, yeah, this is how I do it. And if this feels weird to you, it's probably just because like you haven't sat in on a mix session or I'm just doing it a little differently, not because I'm like faking it and just like, you know. Anyway, so when I sort of felt a little more confident about that stuff, I started inviting people into the session who were local and it felt sort of cool, and I was able to take way bigger risks in mixes.
Okay. Yeah,
so
I get
like
that for sure.
I could halfway through be like, hey, can I try and recut the bass? And they'll be like, I mean, sure. And I do it. And sometimes it's like, oh my God, that's the whole game, because it turned out the original performance just like didn't have the feel and embedded in it. And no matter what I did, it would work. But like, so in some ways I feel like I think like about mixing sort of like a producer more than most people probably, where my first thing is, what's the thing that's going to make this as good as possible, mix or not? I just want to know in my head, like what do I really think about this? And sometimes it's like, you know, it's basically like, okay, the whole rhythm section really in an ideal world needs to be redone. Now that's not always an option, but then when I'm mixing, I understand that that's what I'm up against.
Okay.
And so, but if the client's there, I can say, can we try and like, just like find some different drum sounds here, see what you think.
Yeah.
And I found those are oftentimes the sessions people walk away being like, oh my God, thank you. We fucking saved it.
Yeah.
And so the in-person mixing stuff, or the people, even a remote mixing session, if someone's on the listen to while I'm starting a mix, I can kind of show them how I'm thinking about it. Like, hey, we can place the guitars like way up front, or we can put them back and it can be more of like a rhythm section forward thing. Do you have... And they'll sort of be like, no, I want the guitars loud, because like that's the whole thing. I'll be like, good, I'm glad I had you here, because 50-50, I could have gone this other direction. And my worst nightmare with that stuff is like committing to like a fucking cause and getting it really great and being stoked about it, and then being like, you do get this is actually really good, but like it's not the thing that I wanted. And you're just like, oh no, because your whole brain has been rewired to like hear it in this one way.
Yeah.
So I really try to avoid that at all costs. And sometimes the extreme version is having them there. And then the remote mixing notes is great. Instead of doing 8 back and forth, I'm like, get on the line. How loud do you want the backing vocal? Tell me when. There? Okay, good. Versus too loud, too quiet. Oh, a little too loud. And you need that's 6 bounces, right? That's like a whole day. So I feel like the remote mixing in person is like amazing, because really you just get it right. And they're listening on the thing that they're used to listening to it on. So it's sort of like, it's not like, it's almost better than being in the studio for notes, where they're like, yeah, your speakers sound great on everything. I don't know. This way they're like, okay, I'm listening to my earbuds. That's what I know. And okay.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I get that. And it is important how, you know, everything in a mix affects everything else. So yeah, like a big, bold decision, like, is it guitar heavy? Like, are we pushing the speakers, or is that back?
Yes.
And, you know, in the
exactly.
Blurry,
and sometimes it's like, hey, what if I ran your guitars through this tape machine?
Cool, yeah,
and it's so cool. But I mean, I'm never gonna do that if they're not in the room. It's too much of a risk, and it's like, it's, you know, I don't have the license to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a good point. Like thinking like the producer, where a lot of people that are just right in that mixing lane, they're polishing, they're not making like that huge bold decision.
Yeah.
But that can be the magic sometimes.
Yeah, well, and there's a real split. I mean, like the reason my favorite mixers are more heavy-handed mixers. Like I like Chad Blake or Michael Brower, and you know, I have a friend, Andrew Mowry, who's like, shout out, who's like, I really love his mixes, and I worked with him, you know, a little bit, and
cool.
Like I always liked his stuff because I'll sort of be like, hey, I'm just like up to my eyeballs. Can you please do this? I'm lost. And
Mm-hmm.
he'll just do whatever. He just grounds up everything. And it's just like you
Mm-hmm.
get back like some different thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
great. And obviously, I'm sure there's situations where he's doing more commercial stuff where he
Yeah, yeah,
doesn't,
yeah.
but I know that has it in him. And I think a lot of the people that I know now who are full-time mixers and not producers,
Mm-hmm.
they're literally just like,
Yeah,
it's like really
yeah,
stem mastering,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the remit is like, do not change this. The
Yes,
producer signed off, the A&R signed off, the label signed
yes,
off, the artist,
right.
signed off. Like, you're gonna go there and you're gonna like reinvent it. Good luck with
Uh-huh,
that. Like, you're
uh-huh.
never gonna get an approval.
Yeah.
And that's not what I'm interested in doing,
Mm-hmm.
And I always
Right.
thought of that as
Yeah.
almost like mastering. But
Uh-huh.
I think that we're in this weird place where professional mixers, full-time mixers,
Mm-hmm.
really don't have a lot of wiggle room
Yeah, yeah.
to improve stuff,
Yeah, just the
like
corporate
genuinely improve
reasons.
it, the
Yes.
soul
Right.
of it.
Yes. Yeah. They
They're
can.
just trying to create more headroom, basically.
Right. Yeah. They're
They're trying
they're
to get another 2
polishing
dB of
and
volume.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yes.
So to close out the pod, I have one last question. It's kind of the opposite of the AI question. So the
Yeah.
podcast is named Love Music More, and this is Love Music Why. So basically, the concept is pitching somebody that's like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, why they should love music, why it was so impactful in your life, why we give so much to it. It's like almost like a stump speech or an appeal to music itself. And so I just want to hear in your own
Yeah.
words, like, why do you love music? Why do you grind for this? Why is the studio your home? Like, what makes you tick?
Mm.
What drew you in?
So I think there's two sides to it. One is being a fan of music, which I think almost always comes first. Like, you love other people's music and then you decide I want to do it. And then there's the why is it that I found my particular thing in the studio and stuck with it, you know, despite it being just long hours and hard to make it work and all that stuff. And like, I feel like for a young person, this is what I would say, you're born and you get one or two parents, right? And like, those are the adults in your life. That's the perspective, right? But I don't really think that's enough. Like, I think as a kid, you need to be you need to experience other sort of grown-ups. Now, it may be that the grown-up is like 22 or whatever, but like other people in your life who have a perspective or something to add that's freed from your little world, And so, like, people think of music as an escape, but it's what it really is. It's like a portal into somebody else's universe. And because music is all about someone telling you who they are, it's a really great way to just connect with somebody different. And I think those are like, it's almost when you're younger. I mean, I remember it's like maybe you haven't done psychedelics, but it is like a I mean, when you're 12, but it is like a psychedelic experience, like being in a space in your headphones with like some grown up like pouring their heart out and telling you how they feel about their fucking life and their fucking girlfriend and their whatever. And it's just like, as you get older, I think it's a different relationship because it's like you're out in the world and some of this is less alien and strange and less sort of trippy because like you're like, I know about that. I had my heart broken once too or whatever. But like, I think getting those perspectives early in a safe way, right? In headphones, you're not having to like, and from all these like people out in the world, like trying to be their true self. I mean, I think that that's what it's about. Like, I always feel like at the end of the day, even though I'm like one of those, it's all about the song or whatever. It's really all about the artist or the person at the other end of the telephone, basically. And it's like these people and their work end up really forming who you are, I think, to some degree. That and your parents, if you're lucky, and your sibling or whatever. But it's like that access to a different world. It's not your peers, it's not your parents. You just escape into some other world. It's like reading. Some people get into really reading for that reason. It's like my dad talks about he grew up in South Louisiana in Lafayette and felt pretty alienated. He was like just not always having a great time. but he escaped into books, and books literally were his ticket out of town. He got out, he made a life for himself. You know, he married my mom, whatever. Like, he transformed himself largely by basically having the voices of all of these authors. Like, imagine you're like, 14 and you're in the deep South and you're feeling like no one totally understands you because you're the kid who's like sitting in like your class reading a book like in your binder, and you get sent to the principals for reading in school, like, and you're just like, what am I doing here? But on the other hand, you've got like, the voices of like all of these like really worldly grown-ups right in front of you who are telling you about a different way that you can be and showing you there's a possible different way of being and thinking, and that there's a big world out there. So I think music is just like a more of a visceral, like mainlined version of that escape into other worlds, So anyway, and then the reason I like studio is it's about play. It's about like having fun. It's about creating a space of just like, we don't get to play as grown-ups, like everything is fucking serious and there's rules, and I think this is again why like maybe coming back to some of the like more formulaic ways of teaching and learning are detracted, because they set up the illusion that there are these like guardrails or these rules or these best practices. When the whole point is it's like the one time in your life when you don't have to do it one way or another. And I think that like that is probably what keeps me coming back more than anything about like, man, it feels so great when you just like rip a great mix and it sounds and it feels, and a great song. That's all good, but I think it really is just about having a place to like play,
I love that. Great answer.
Sorry, I went on, but
no, it's good.
I do go on. I think like talking is a defense mechanism for doing really long sessions and not being able to work consistently through the whole time. So I've got to like I got to fill the dead space while you recalibrate or whatever. So I always just turn around in my chair and then talk to someone about whatever.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate
feels
all
like
of
that.
It was good. It was good. I really appreciate all your insight. I think that this kind of thinking can really help somebody that's trying to figure this out. And a mindset shift rather than a skill shift. And I think that was important to pass on. Yeah.
Yeah. All of my big, proudest moments were about that. It wasn't like I finally got good at something. I just looked at it at a different angle and was just like, oh, that's what it is,
Yeah.
And I think like so much is like that. Like singers trying to find how the best way to sing. It's like everyone thinks they need to take lessons and get better and better, but it's just like you need to like take a step back and understand your own voice and how it works. And then when you do that, I think it can just sort of like fall into place. You don't actually have to get good at anything. Mm-hmm. But that's like what getting good is or something. I don't know.
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah, it is weird.
It's like letting go of the idea of there being a good that you have to get to. Then you realize, but you can't fake it. You actually have to like come to that genuine conclusion or something. And then maybe you have a shot, at doing something cool.
Yeah.
But
there's its own little hero's journey of shedding.
Yes. Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Harper. I really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody tuning in.
Of course.
Where could people, connect with you or book you, or what would be the best place for people to find you?
Totally. I have a website. It's harperjamesmusic.com.
Perfect.
Or social media, Harper James X and Harper James X on TikTok.
Perfect.
There's another Harper James somewhere. I don't know.
Cool. Yeah.
So the X on the end.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on, and I hope everybody enjoys.
Cheers.
it.
Yeah, and let's you and I stay in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually be in New York next month in October. So if you're around, I'll
hit me up.
You got it. All right, man.
Yes.
Thanks
Okay.
so much.
Bye.